For a lot of our partners east of us. Thank you. So for this year's series, for those of us that are familiar with the Gobeshona series, it was an initiative started by our founder and our director, Dr. Salim ul Haq, who started it off as a knowledge sharing platform to collect information, to collect good practices, actionable research, evidence-based activities that could be used for policy making, particularly for climate change impacts that were happening in Bangladesh. This was a series that he kicked off way back in 2015 as a physical conference that was hosted, bringing in partners not only from across Bangladesh, from all the different districts and localities, but also international communities that are working on climate change adaptation. Over the years, when we've been working as a conference series and collecting a lot of the good practices and lessons that have been coming from local practices and local research, during the pandemic, we obviously could not hold this as a physical conference. So we shifted gears and turned this into a global conference, which has been going virtual. And I'm delighted to say that this year is our 5th edition. So since the pandemic, we've gone fully virtual and online. And we've been working on a global series, being able to bring in much more local communities, much more local practices that are happening, not just across in South Asia and in Bangladesh, but across from different regions and different communities, being able to give the voices to the people themselves. A physical conference was oftentimes very, very restrictive for us in being able to bring community voices, being able to bring in people that were not able to travel, not able to bring in their experiences live in person. But the virtual series allows us to do that. It really allows us to have a lot of enhancement of the activities that people are doing by bringing that into the online sphere and being able to showcase a lot of the good practices that local communities are taking on their own and how we might be able to better support them. So a little bit of a brief about how we operate the conference series in a global format. So we kick off here in our time zone in South Asia, in Bangladesh, where a number of our partners throughout today and our time zone here will be kicking off and talking about their initiatives. This is really a platform where we are hosting it as a conference series, but the work is from our partners. The session hosts themselves wherever they are based, the communities that they're engaged with, the local government initiatives that they're highlighting and championing. Those are the work that people are doing in their own communities, in their own localities, and we are merely serving as a platform for them to learn from, for them to network, for other people to get an understanding about what are the different activities happening. So as we go through our time zone and going into the European and African zones, we have a lot of our partners and friends that are working in areas there. And as the day progresses across the globe, we move into the Americas zone, where we have a number of colleagues and partners that will be doing a lot of their activities and showcasing some of their work. And then we loop back around. So this series is really something that we run 24/7 for throughout the week. And we're delighted that we've been doing this for the last 4 years. This is our 5th edition. And we have a number of our partners that have been very, very strong in supporting us throughout a lot of our collaborations here on the panel today. And I'll be handing over to my colleagues and my panelists very, very shortly. So as we've seen over the number of years, this is our 5th edition, and a lot of the different topics have grown in their importance of the areas that they're working on, in the areas that people were really not being able to gather a lot of evidence. There were still early research and early practices that we were collecting. But as the series has grown, we've done the 5 series in person and the 5 series as a virtual series now. We've really seen a lot more evidence and research being collected, a lot of good practices being highlighted, but of course, a lot of challenges that have been showing up. And one of the reasons for doing this as a global audience, as a global conference, is really to understand that adaptation can be very, very context specific, but there are certain things that does cross the boundaries, does cross the borders, and it is about finding out how other people using a different perspective, a different lens of looking at the same adaptation issues, how have they overcome similar challenges, how have they overcome some of the barriers, and what are those successes that we might be able to replicate and learn from and network with each other and collaborate to enhance our climate actions going forward. So as you see, this is just a brief word cloud of some of the themes that have emerged throughout the conferences that we go through. Bangladesh being a little bit prominent because quite a lot of our partners and networks are based here, and a number of our members from our Gobeshona conference series have been following us over the last decade or so. But we're very, very delighted to have a growing audience that have been going across the various regions and the different time zones as we've been doing this over the last few years. highlighting some of the key objectives that we try to do. As I mentioned, this is about bringing in knowledge and research that is actionable, not research just for the sake of it, not just having papers being published and being saved as a PDF or as a Word document that is not being informed on anything, but really learning from practices that can be actionable. What are the impacts that are happening? What are the physical challenges and practical examples that we might be able to showcase? Learning from people that are doing those activities, not just as a group of scholars, but also from practitioners, and being able to deliver those with policymakers. And how can we circle that loop really to be able to make sure that our climate actions are being taken as effectively as possible? And one last thing before I hand over to my colleague to give us a brief about this year's conference is, over the years, what we've been trying to do with a number of our partners is focus on what we call the 8 principles of locally led adaptation. Locally led adaptation, in our perspective, really has the emphasis put onto the second L, leadership of local communities, being able to enhance their ownership, their own agency, being able to make sure that they are the ones that are informed and being effective in taking the decisions that are happening in their communities, in their context, and are the ones that are really designing and shaping the actions that are going through. And we hope that this series that we've been doing globally as we go across the various regions gives us good examples of how these principles are manifested. What are the different ways that people are embodying these principles? How are they owning up to them? How are we making sure that local communities are the ones that are in charge of the adaptation initiatives that are happening? And what are the ways that we can make these actions be scaled up? How can we make sure more communities, more geographical regions are involved in this? And how do we bring in all stakeholders coming through? And we hope the learnings from these sessions throughout the conference are a way for us to document that. All of our sessions are broadcasted on Zoom, but then recorded and put on live on a YouTube channel. And these are really learnings and lessons that we hope other people can take from us, be able to use the series and learnings from the conferences for them to inform better practices and better activities coming forward. So with that being said, I'll hand over to my colleague, Shohail bin Saifullah, who is the Gobeshona Global Conference coordinator for this year, and he'll give us a rundown of what's happening this year. Shohail, the floor is yours. If you can hand back to me when you're done.
Hello, am I audible? Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Sohail. We will be speaking about why we went online, and as well as by going online, what sort of benefits that we have been able to achieve. When Gobeshona initially started, it was a physical event that spanned over 3 days with over roughly 20 sessions in the span of 3 days. We realized that during COVID, we could reach out to a lot of our international partners and have a lot more broader viewing. Hence why we decided to move on to our online persona. From the current standpoint, we already have a 450 plus total registration, and over 1,600 people have viewed our page as well. So from that understanding, we can see that we're already having a broader perspective and also a broader audience moving from there. Next slide, please. We have at this point 35 sessions, of which two sessions will be done in hybrid, where we have a workshop happening during the conference itself that will be broadcasted live, and we'll have international participants and panelists join into that session as well. So we're trying to see that how we can bring that international collaboration and as well as international knowledge sharing ideology onto this conference. And from there, we also have over 100 plus speakers, and they're all branching from in multiple parts of the world, some from Africa, some from Asia, some from our Western partners as well. With that being said, I'd like to pass back to Saqib Bhai for the next part of the session.
Thank you, Shohail. So now I'm delighted to bring in our group of panelists who have been an ardent supporter for a lot of our activities over the year, not just through the Gobeshona series, but a lot of the activities that we've been engaged in locally led adaptation. And I do recognize that many of us do have a little bit of a time constraint. It is a Saturday, so I'm very, very grateful for everyone taking their time on a weekend and as well as while they're traveling. So I would like to be able to introduce the speakers one by one, if that is all right, and for you to please come on camera, give us your remarks and your support. And I do recognize that if you need to drop out, that's perfectly all right. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ms. Runa Khan, founder and executive director of Friendship NGO. Runapa, if you'd like to maybe give your remarks and then hand back to me when you're done.
Thank you very much. I'm so happy to be here today. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Thank you very much. So we have over the last 23 years, Friendship has been working with locally led adaptation solutions, and this is something which I hope, we have been a very close partner of Gobeshona for this. So I'm very honored to be here, participants, ladies and gentlemen, and Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. And today I have to say, I have to go back. Really, I deeply miss and remember dear Professor Salimul Haq, whose absence I think is being felt amongst all of us today. Thank you for inviting me to share Friendship's journey of 23 years, working with climate migrants, developing solutions with them and for them to reach needed services, but services rooted in creating for them opportunity, dignity, and hope, because that's the only way to make it sustainable. There was no roadmap when we started working. Every delivery of service for the migrant communities needed to be rethought, innovated differently. Only the certainty being that working without listening to what they needed and asking the indigenous practical knowledge, we knew it would be destined to fail. Hence, being one of the first signatories of the LLA conventions when it came in. When the land beneath you shifts, when rivers swallow your homes, when tomorrow's horizon disappears overnight, you cannot afford illusions. You need systems that belongs to you, and hence it is locally led. And this is what Friendship has built, systems that belongs to the people themselves. Locally led adaptation has been not a theory with us, not an academic choice, but it was the reality that we worked with. It had to be practical. Adaptation solutions, needed to be humane. It needed to be directly working with those who carry the burden. And today, the reality remains. According to OECD in 2024, around 10% of the international finances, climate finances, reaches the local actors. In contrast, they have said that initiatives which are taken by the local communities have 50% greater adaptation success. So why should we, even in our remotest plans, ignore LLA? Rural poor in Bangladesh, they spend annually $2 billion on adaptation because they are the victims. And this is actually double the rate that is what the government and development aid gives to them. And this is from their own pockets. The Global South leads with solutions, and I'm proud to say that over 70% of the successfully led adaptation pilots have emerged from countries like Bangladesh, Kenya, Senegal, Fiji. And yet only 15% of adaptation finances are reaching them today. Bangladesh stands at a frontline 7th, though, on the global climate risk. In demographic impact, it is the highest. 40 million people are on their way to becoming impacted and displaced by 2050. And despite this, Bangladesh receives only 1% of global financing for adaptation. After decades of lessons, after floods, cyclones, forced migrations, we are now at a crossroad. Are we, this path that we are taking of the way that financing occurs, the way that adaptation is spread and shared, are we going to stand like this, or we need a radical change in the way that we carry solutions done in Bangladesh across the globe? All those who need it. And I have to come back to Friendship. After 2 decades, Friendship has proven that adaptation solution is a living practice. Our floating ship hospitals in the remotest areas, riverine areas, dismantleable schools, health services, which today the government of Bangladesh, our healthcare services, we are very proud to say that they have accepted this as being to be integrated into the government system for remote communities. And this was done when we launched 5 new hospital ships, and this healthcare system, which they will take over in 5 years' time. And the Bangladesh's largest mangrove reforestation is also being done with us. And this is extremely important for protection and, of course, for livelihood for the people and towards mitigation. So micro-social entrepreneurships happen, empowering farmers, fishermen, paralegals, solar technicians are created. People must be able to move ahead with what training, innovation capacities, financing, which they can internalize and move on even when they are not there. And funding flow without leakage needs to reach to them directly. Policies must be shaped with local voices at the decision table. And local voices, I mean, not only organizations, but hearing from those who are spending those 2 billion every year. And above all, if you do not have a sense of integrity towards your team, towards the beneficiaries, towards all the stakeholders, this will not work in the long run. At COP29, despite the broad declarations of 300 billion, et cetera, we are still translating promises, into some kind of a language which is still we are not yet seeing. And platforms like Gobeshona continue to play a crucial and a critical role. They bridge the global ambition with local realities. And through working with ground root research, with local organizations and communities, they help to lift local voices to shape adaptation that is inclusive, practical, and bringing dignity to those who have been impacted. Our collective survival needs bridges like Gobeshona, and we should all truly be grateful for this platform and be part of it as much as possible. We have learned at Friendship that even amongst devastation, communities can and will rebuild themselves if they are given the tools. And we have found this happening from Friendship communities, who are in the front line. They are today representatives of the youth parliaments in Strasbourg, at COP, at national universities, medical colleges. We do not need to teach resilience to them. We need to nurture that resilience within them, respect it, and resource it so that it is giving them a platform on which they can stand. Our fight is not only about enabling survival, giving them opportunity, but also the right to dream. And let us build a future where locally led adaptation is not a slogan, but a DNA of every climate action that we take. Let us build a future where no one is left struggling on sinking lands, where the world debates whilst the world is debating on the definitions of what is LLA and what is locally led adaptations and what is a localization. Let us build a future where dignity and justice are at the heart of every decision that is taken. And we must embark on this endeavor together today, not in the coming future. Thank you, Gobeshona, for providing this platform to all of us.
Thank you, Rana ma'am. I really, really do appreciate your support, your call to support to have more people join us in this initiative. And I think a few critical points that you mentioned there, not only highlighting the challenges that local communities and households are bearing in doing the adaptation needs themselves, oftentimes with the meager resources and funding that they do have of their own, but also a critical element of how to make this more sustainable in the longer run. Being able to recognize that communities and local individuals should have agency in the work that they're doing. They should have the dignity and the hope to do the work that they're doing. And that really does spur them to be able to carry on the work, even after project funds may be shut down from international aid. They do find ways to be resilient and find ways to take that work ahead. And it's really about making those connections and adaptive capacity of people. So thank you so much for that. Without further ado, I would like to now turn to our next speaker, Ms. Farah Kabir, Country Director for Action Aid Bangladesh. Farah ma'am, if you could please come online, and at the end of your remarks, please hand back to me. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Saqib. And for some reason, I'm not able to put the camera on. Is it from your there? Thank you. Again, this is the 5th Gobeshona conference. It's exciting, and I'm very happy to be part of this. And I will again repeat, as I have over the years, that Professor Salimul Haq was also influenced by the community because Gono Gobeshona was something that ActionAid started doing from 2006 or 7 or 8. And he liked how this whole process of people doing a people research on the impacts of climate change, disasters, and how they were able to respond. So it's at the very core of ActionAid for the last 40 years, both local-led adaptation and localization, because it's all, our work is all about empowering or standing by the community, especially women and youth. And as climate extremities is a reality in our life at a scale that is very difficult to comprehend sometimes, adaptation was critical. Our programs were designed through participatory assessment, ensuring that community identify the vulnerabilities and solutions, drawing on traditional ecological knowledge. Women and youth-led organizations would engage with their own community, but also influence the local government, advocating for better services and local-driven project implementation. So, Gobeshona groups and community-based organizations were a space and energy enabling them to manage even when they had very limited resources and come up with ideas and implement projects. But they also monitored and looked at the impact. So it's amazing how communities have developed the capacity. We were facilitators, or we just nudged them. We were there, but they picked up and they were resilient. I mean, Bangladesh is known for being resilient. Facts and figures have already been mentioned about our status, where Bangladesh stands in terms of climate impact. I'm not going to repeat them, and how we are addressing the emergencies, disasters, repeated and frequent. So if I was to talk about local-led adaptation practices from our work over the years, something like building a bunker so that they could preserve their seeds, their documents, the water, to create, developing a river ambulance, basically converting a small local boat into, with a phone, with a first aid kit and trained paramedics, into a river ambulance. But that was so needed in the early 20s or mid 2008 onwards, at Shirajganj or other church areas. Today, we have examples of hospitals and so on, but going back, it wasn't there. So we worked with the women-led emergency group, supported youth-led agroecological interventions in areas such as Satkira, Bagherhat, Borguna, Cox's Bazar. We've always been promoting women-led adaptation initiatives like climate resilient gardening, micro-enterprises, agroecology school in Lalmonirhat, boosting both the resilience of women and also farmers. The first Farmers Association, Kendriya Krishok Moitri, was developed so that they could pioneer agroecology and climate resilient sustainable agriculture in the face of when there was hybrid and climate smart agriculture being pushed, but they stuck to climate resilient sustainable agriculture. Engagement of community and youths in water governance, because water is such an important resource, both in terms of governance, sustainability, and management of local water bodies. And that led to the establishment of the first Asia, the community-led water museum in Kuakata in 2024. So cluster village model, community-based adaptation, facilitating knowledge generation, exchange, and capacity building. This has been at the core of the work that we are doing. And I think Gobeshona as a platform plays a critical role, because it goes beyond our national borders, and it has brought in global knowledge sharing and opportunity to learn from best practices in other parts of the world. It's serving as a strategic advocacy platform for the recognition and support of local-led approaches. I think, Gobeshona, Professor Haag, and all the other members were able to take the learnings and experiences, networking and partnership to the global level. And we now can say that it has also helped to provide evidence to support policy advocacy at national, local, and international level. What I would say that key outcomes or recognitions related to local adaptation would be, the emphasis on national adaptation plan. There was one originally, which was prepared by Bangladesh, the early stages, I think post 2008. But now we have a stronger national adaptation plan and strategy. However, when you have a strategy and a plan, it calls for financing. Undoubtedly, the need for increased access to finances for local-led initiatives is still very, very slow. And we think this is where we have to come together and do more in terms of both advocacy and ensuring that the funding flows to the grassroots level. As I work every day, I learn that there's availability of funds in different ministries or in different ports, which are not being used, or people are not aware that such finances is available, even nationally. And at the global level, we all know what the story is, how slow it's been. And there's this debate now around local aid adaptation financing versus loss and damage, which is artificial. And we need to make sure that they are separate. Ensuring inclusion of women, youth, and marginalized groups in decision-making is so critical that even if it's being repeated, I would repeat it again, because it's not happening at the scale that it is required. I think South-South cooperation for knowledge exchange and scaling up of successful models is also critical, because we do have micro models. What we need is both at the national level for the government, the authorities to scale it up, but also at global level, the recognition and the energy and finance behind it, so that community and their adaptation strategies, ideas are developed. Essential elements of, because I would say for accountable monitoring would be community leadership, because unless first we need them to be in the designing state, but they also need to be monitoring, selecting the indicators, not just global indicators, but also coming from the grassroots, from the bottom-up approach. Cultural relevant data collection is important, and I think Gobeshona creates some of those opportunities. And youth and community-led social audits, public hearings, and budget tracking is very critical. It's important to remember that building local capacity to collect, analyze, and use adaptation data to foster ownership and relevance, because prescriptions or PhDs somewhere else or models in some other part of the world can be brought in, but it may not be relevant or contextual. So we have to understand also inclusivity and diversity. I would emphasize that Gobeshona, with its annual conferences, is of course creating this knowledge sharing and exchange, but it's also a model where best practices and lessons are being documented and recorded, and there is collaboration between networks. There's also training for local actors, even local officials and decision makers, which is extremely important. Then there is collective policy advocacy, and I think Gobeshona creates another opportunity, especially at the international level. We need transparency and legitimacy, but we also need to remember that locally led adaptation is it's not charity, it's about justice. Communities are not just beneficiaries, they are the architects of resilience, and they are a major stakeholder. When you have local people-led adaptation, it succeeds. Sometimes it fails, but generally it succeeds. Real adaptation starts when we hand over the money, the decision, the planning to the grassroots. We strongly believe that at ActionAid. We don't want to adapt for communities, we adapt with them and through them. I think this is critical, that we adapt with them and through them. No adaptation would be truly just unless it listens first and acts second. Knowledge flow must be there, but it needs to be made simple or in a form and language that the community, the women, the youth understand. Investing in locally led adaptation is actually investing in climate justice and human dignity. And without local leadership, adaptation is like a house built on a sand, if you can see the analogy. Communities already hold solution. Our job is to listen to them, trust and support them. And we need to have a comprehensive planning. And for our governments across the world, there needs to be coordinated action. Different actors, ministries, they need to come together for the same interests. I'll stop with that.
Thank you, ma'am. I some really, really critical points that you highlighted there. But again, thank you for the call to support for the Gobeshona platform and a lot of the work that you're doing. So I will plug back in the sessions that you have also talked about and some of the innovations that you're working on, not just in this year's conference, but also the previous years. There have been a number of sessions that we've collaborated with on ActionAid's approaches for the innovations that you've been seeing, and particularly some of the ways on how it might be developed, not just with the projects that you're working on, but how others can learn to replicate and work on those initiatives. So I would encourage everyone to go back to some of the previous year's conference sessions, which have been recorded on ActionAid's activities, and look at how they might be able to replicate and work on some of the similar activities that you've mentioned, and be a bit more inclusive in how we might open up the work and stakeholders that we are engaged with, in particular for South-South collaborations. I think that is also one of the critical elements that you highlighted that we try to champion through this Gobeshona platform, is not only for it to be a global North and a South sort of relationship, but how can global South communities really be cooperative, collaborate with each other, and learn from the best practices that are happening. And thank you again for highlighting some of that.
Can I just add one thing, Sakib?
Yes, ma'am, please.
We've just finished the Renewable Energy Fest 2025. It's the first time ever in Bangladesh. And if you saw the different projects, innovations that came up, they are also local-led adaptation, but focusing on more on the renewable energy. So there's huge learning opportunities there as well. Do look up on the website and on our social media platform. And young people are coming up with these ideas that will transform the energy and the power sector.
Thank you, ma'am. And I recall seeing some of the highlights of that conference as well, with a greater push for Bangladesh to increase their share of renewable energies, I think by about 3% over the next coming years, trying to hit a target of 10% by the end of that decade. So again, for those of us that are following those issues, please do also look out for that. We'll try and also make a post just to link with some of the conference activities if you're having difficulty finding the renewable energy transitions work coming through. One final point from Farah ma'am's remarks is about making sure the funding gets down to the local levels, understanding that there are a number of different funding pots, not just internationally, which has many, many challenges for local communities and local governments to be able to access, but also understanding the national, the regional, and other sort of philanthropic or other avenues of where funding pots exist, and how do we make sure that funding flows down to the local levels. And I use that as an excellent segue to go on to our next speaker, Dr. Ghulam Rabbani, who's the head of the Climate Bridge Fund, which is an innovative national and local level fund based here in Dhaka, Bangladesh, secretariated at BRAC NGO. Rabbani bhai, I'll hand it over to you if you can hand back to me at the end of your remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much, Sakib. Thank you very much for having me in this opening panel to talk about, some of the questions that you have shared with us. Let me just, focus on at least 2-3 questions, because, it would be time constraint, if I try to respond all 5 questions. So I will focus on at least, 2-3 questions. The first questions, if I see is, how our organization, for example, the Climate Bridge Fund, is promoting and applying the LLA principles in our programs, policies, and also research, and other activities. So the first is, in terms of the program, at least 5 out of 8 principles are inbuilt key elements of designing any program or projects for accessing climate risk fund, in our mechanism. So in terms of localization, if I see it's not only the climate risk fund, but overall BRAC in most of the programs, localization is inbuilt mechanism or strategy that they follow to adopt, implement the programs under different major programs at BRAC. So in addition, there is another principle that the second principle, which is structural inequalities. We actually keep this structural inequality aspect in designing the projects for CBF. And the third principle that I want to share is the flexible mechanism. We follow the flexibility and adaptive approach when you design a project or program to implement on the ground. So these are 3, 4, 5 principles that we can talk about. These are inbuilt element when you design a project or program for CBF. In terms of policies, in our own institutional policy and operational modalities, the LLA principles, some of the LLA principles are quite consistent with the eligibility criteria of accessing climate risk fund. So our policy and operational modality actually gives us a mandate to strengthen collaboration, transparency, and accountability. So what we see, we do have some challenges, but at the same time, most of the principles remain as our policy instrument, to promote and apply these principles in our implementation, project selections to implementation of our projects. In terms of research, we see that our focus on integration of science and evidence-based knowledge in designing a project remains, an important principle, which is aligned with the 5th principles of LLA. And we suggest, all our interested proponents to be aligned with the National Adaptation Plan and also the Bangladesh Climate Change Strategy and Action Plan, as Farapa and Runapa was talking about. Let me now focus on your second question, how I view the Gobeshona platform as a catalyst and mechanism to support and monitor the global progress of LLA principles. Let me just use 3 words to explain, how I see Gobeshona platform. I still remember when, Dr. Salimul Haq sir started, and you also shared at your opening remarks that, the target was to bring the researchers and share the research findings and exchange this knowledge with the different group of stakeholders. But in reality, in practice, you can see this is now became a common platform for the policymakers, practitioners, researchers, academicians, and private sectors. And these platforms are giving the different knowledge, and this knowledge are being used by the different practitioners on the ground. My second word is tracking. If you look at the last 4 conferences, and also I believe that you are also integrating in this same the 5th conference, you provide an opportunity to share information and success stories and see how and if LLA principles are making any difference on the ground. So it means like, we are tracking LLA practices in different parts of the world, not only in Bangladesh. So these 2 words actually, are important to elaborate, how I see, the Gobeshona platform are playing a pivotal role as a catalyst and a mechanism. And my last word is connect. And when I say connecting the research and action, I see that Gobeshona brings all stakeholders, as I mentioned, together and make sure scientific knowledge and research findings are used to local actions. So these are very visible at this point. And let me just, address the, third and last question, which is on what are the essential and elements of the inclusive and accountable monitoring system that reflects community voices and ensures climate justice. Let me just give you at least 6 points, small points. The first thing is I absolutely agree with Farapa when she said, we adapt with them and through them. So which means like, stakeholder engagement. And when we say stakeholder engagement, it doesn't mean only to include the communities. It includes the local authorities, state actors, non-state actors, local communities, and the different other actors on the ground, and design them, implement them, monitor them, evaluate them together, so that the ownership, is ensured at the ground. My second point is, the targeting the vulnerable and marginalized group as indicated in the earlier principles. My third point is, of course, the local and indigenous knowledge is extremely important, because if you look at the fifth principles, it has to be a combined scientific knowledge with indigenous and local knowledge, so that you bring a win-win situation. And of course, gender equity is extremely important. And my fifth point is, when we talk about the different type of measures, for example, monitoring and evaluation, gender action plans, we must have a sufficient budget to ensure that monitoring, evaluation, and learning is well done on the ground, and implementing partners are focusing on this. And my last point under this this third question is the democratization of climate finance. What do I mean by this? I mean the democratization of climate finance is, we need to ensure the vulnerable people should have access to the grants, to the loans, to the savings, to the investments, and of course insurance, protection measures, so that they are not under poverty and climate vulnerability trap. I stop here. Thank you, Saqib.
Thank you, Rabbani Bhai. As a veteran presenter and panelist for our Gobeshona series, it's always great to have your voice and sort of see the trends of how the research has evolved, what are the different things that we've been noticing coming through, but also take your advice on how we might be able to enhance that. As a research platform, that was very much one of the areas that we've always tried to garner. But you're quite right that, again, as we grow, we also look into other stakeholders, maybe perhaps communities that might be able to use these research and take that on from researchers and scholars like ourselves, but then take that forward for practitioners and policymakers to go through. And with that being said, I would plug in a lot of the experiences that you have had at the Climate Bridge Fund over the last 5 years, I believe, you've been operating for, and those are some really good innovations that you've been having at the national and local levels, and different thematic for sort of funds that you have released under the Climate Bridge Fund, and for everyone to use your experiences, your learnings as inspiration, just to be able to sort of shift the dynamics of how funding has been operating over the last decades or so. But there might be new ways of being able to do that, more inclusive ways of being able to do that, and very much use your experiences and get in touch to understand how you've been able to achieve that, and what might be better ways that we can collaborate and scale that forward. And thank you so much for your continued support onto this. So now I'd like to move on to our next speaker from the government of Bangladesh. We have Mr. Mirza Shaukat Ali, who is the Director of Climate Change and International Convention from the Department of Environment from the government of Bangladesh. Mirza, sir, if you would like to go on with your remarks and then hand back to me at the end of your remarks. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Shakib. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Distinguished panelists, I think Dr. Ayunisha sir is not here. So I start with Ms. Farah Kabir, Ms. Runa Khan, Dr. Ghulam Rabbani, and to you, Mr. Saqib Haq. Distinguished colleagues attending the opening session of the Global Gobeshona Conference, Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. Good afternoon. At the outset, let me thank the organizer for inviting me to the Gobeshona Conference, and allow me to remember Dr. Selimullah sir, who actually engaged me or invited me from the very beginning of this Gobeshona initiative. I remember I was going as a representative from the Department of Environment to the Gobeshona initiatives that started long back. I don't remember exactly 2015 or so maybe. So But due to my engagement, increasing a busy schedule, I could not attend on a regular basis, especially when ICCCAD ICCCAD shifted to IUB campus, because due to distance between my office and ICCCAD, it became difficult. During working days, I could not attend so many conferences where actually Selim sir invited me. After having said this, let me mention that what the government at the moment is doing on LLA framework. We are working with uh, Asian Development Bank to develop a LLA local led adaptation framework. Actually, we are trying to organize this. Based on um, uh, trying to make it participatory, locally led, and gender and disability, youth, and socially inclusive. And according to our ministry, we are trying to develop a national locally led action framework as well as the action plan. And Asian Development Bank as well as CEGS is providing support to develop this framework. If I look into the draft LLA framework, then we can find that there are several key areas, especially policy and legislative framework, budgeting and finance, institutions, climate resilient planning, monitoring, evaluation, and learning. This is a very important area, monitoring, evaluation, and learning, because at the moment we are trying to, not only for LLA framework, we are trying to establish a monitoring, evaluation, and learning platform at the Department of Environment for NAP as well as for NDC, and maybe hopefully at the later stage, we shall also try to look into the LLA initiatives that is ongoing at the local level. So a particular focus of the LLA framework is how to support locally led adaptation aligned with the decentralization to the local government. We are expecting that Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change will be the actually advisor and coordinate technical implementation activities of the LLA framework. And the local government division under the Ministry of Local Government, Rural Development and Cooperatives will be responsible for the implementation and supervision of the LLA framework at the local level. Finance division under the Ministry of Finance will be responsible to ensure proper fiduciary management. This is a very important area because I think our local level institutions lack this budgeting and fiduciary management, lacks with fiduciary management. And the implementation and monitoring and evaluation will be done by the Economic Relations Division and IMED at the Planning Commission. So I also would like to mention that the government has tried to establish a hub, LLA hub, under the banner of GCA Global Center on Adaptation. And actually, Global Center on Adaptation is trying to implement some of the activities in the coastal area. They are working with the local government engineering department and local communities actually to implement some of the activities they have identified under their work program. And they have engaged us to some extent with the implementation of those activities. Now let me focus on some of the other aspects of the LLA framework. The concept of local level planning is not new because I went to Philippines in 2001, and I have seen how their local level they plan their local villagers plan their local plans. Like they called it barangay, and usually the mayor they call the head of the village is mayor, and then they call the village barangay. So barangay head is the mayor, and then they select a day, and then local government officials come, even the planning officials, relevant planning officials come. They together they draw up their plans, and then they even try to mobilize some of the resources themselves from the local level to fund some of the activities. Distinguished colleagues, according to the LLA framework, local adaptation priorities and plans will evolve from the local bottom, and central government shall provide financial and technical support. That is the understanding that we are actually we have perceived in our LLA framework, but not necessarily entirely from the national budget. The total fund will come, because we have tried to link in the draft LLA framework that some international funding will also be mobilized. But unfortunately, the challenge is that the most of the support that we receive from the development partners or international community comes as a project support. But I think if we can make like through Gobeshona platform or through South-South cooperation and other initiatives, we can, I think, make it a like they can give us a funding for local level adaptation activities, so that we can utilize the fund, not necessarily on a project by project basis, but along with the local government budget, government can allocate resources for local level planning, so that we can implement different activities in the entire region. Because if we look into the project activities, it becomes difficult. You can actually maybe concentrate support to a specific location. Rather, if we can access resources from development partners, international community, through the local government officials, local government institution, through our finance division, and then to the local government institution, when they will implement the locally led adaptation activities, actually they can utilize these resources. I think the way we were considering these locally led adaptation initiatives is that most of the resources will come from the local government or the national government. But I think as an LDC country, although we will graduate on 2026, I think there should be some provision that we can mobilize resources internationally, and blending the national and international support, we can implement some of the local led adaptation activities. So that will actually facilitate implement so many activities at the local level, because we have budgetary constraints and government cannot actually address all the adaptation issues that is important at the local level. So I think Gobeshona platform can facilitate this kind of discussion at the global level. And apart from the project by project basis, they can also look into this opportunity that whether a considerable amount of resources can be channeled to the national government, so that they can implement the project activities at the local level. And I can mention also that government alone cannot actually reach to the local government. So we need support of the NGO, CSO, and the civil society. And I would also like to mention that considering this, we have kept provision of engaging private sector for the implementation of our national adoption plan. And if you look into our NAP, you'll find that 5.1% of the total investment of $230 billion over the next 27 years, 5.1% we have kept for private sector investment. So I consider that private sector, NGOs, CSOs, they can actually mobilize, their expertise, their capacity, and also their, budget to support the local communities. And I actually appreciate the Gobeshona platform for sharing this kind of opportunities that we can actually venture. So I don't know, I'm not an expert on locally led adaptation, but I have tried what the government is trying to do. So I'll try to stop here. And once again, I would like to thank the organizer, especially ICCCAD, for inviting me as one of the panelists to the Global Gobeshona platform. Thank you once again.
Thank you, Mirza sir. And I think that was very good for a lot of our colleagues and partners to understand that the government doesn't work as a homogeneous entity. There are a number of different ministries, number of different departments, all of whom have a role to play as a whole of society approach and a whole of government approach in tackling the adaptation initiatives. And it's really, really good to hear that the Bangladesh government have been very, very proactive and looking into the LLA issues as well. And as you know, from our center here at ICCCAD, we're always very supportive and would like to collaborate on the different different initiatives that you're working on LLA. So please do count us on in any of the activities that you would like to be engaging with, as well as our partners through the Gobeshona network. And again, a few of the areas that you particularly highlighted in understanding that there are a number of opportunities that the government is aware of, which are very low cost activities, but have really high impact adaptation benefits. And there is a wealth of those sorts of activities, but oftentimes perhaps in terms of budgetary constraints or international support, those might be areas that might be restricted. Those might be areas that will not be receiving a lot of focus. But then using platforms such as this and using a multi-stakeholder approach, bringing in a lot of interest from local communities and private sector as well, might be a way for us to be able to garner some of those low-hanging fruit and get those adaptation initiatives to really foster and take root. So those are some really, really excellent points that you've highlighted. And thank you again for the support from the Department of Environment. Also on one of your points, we do take on the LLA framework, the locally led adaptation framework that Bangladesh government have been taking on board. And this is something also as a learning that we would like to champion in the areas of adaptation that Bangladesh have so advently looking into globally, in being able to enhance the adaptation work that Bangladesh has been working on, and using the platform of Gobeshona for other countries that are still trying to get to grips about how adaptation initiatives can be broken down at the local level, at the local government level, as well as community levels, and what might be different ways and policies and strategies that need to be developed, and how we make those policies in an inclusive manner. So using the framework that's been developed from Bangladesh is a very good example for other countries to be also learning and taking shape for their own activities. So with that being said, I'd like to do a final round of thanks to all our panelists and our speakers. I do recognize that due to time constraints and different time zones that people are joining in from, a number of us had to leave. I do also regret not being able to have Dr. Ainun Nishad join us as he's been a little bit unwell, but we wish him the very best and thank him for a lot of the support that he's been giving to us, not just for this year, but the number of Gobeshona conferences and collaborations that we've been having. And just before I finally close, I'd like to echo on the remarks from my colleague, Mr. Saifullah, in the areas that we might be able to enhance a lot of the participation. So if you have not already registered for this year's conference, please do look out at our social media pages, at our websites, for you to be able to open and join in for the sessions. All of our sessions are free to register. They're still open for participation. So please do look out for the different sessions and different themes that you might be interested in and be able to join. Please do feel free to share for many of the sessions that we're able to broadcast live on our social media pages. Please do share those. And if you're not able to join us live in the sessions, please do follow the recordings that we have on our YouTube channels. And again, be able to bring in and share the awareness and the knowledge that we've been able to establish through this platform and hopefully grow as we go into our 5th year. In a number of areas, we're also trying a few experiments ourselves. So this is one of the first years where we're having a hybrid session throughout the conference. So those are some different elements that we're trying to bring in innovations in, not just hosting Zoom sessions, but also have a live workshop in doing capacity building exercises and training activities during the conference series as well. And we hope that in coming years, some of the activities that you do from your own projects, from your own initiatives, from your own activities are ways that we might be able to enhance and be able to showcase them onto the platform for other people to learn, for other communities and practitioners to learn from, and be able to build in the training and capacity that we have been embedded into this research platform, but use that as practice and put that into action. And lastly, for a number of our colleagues that will be joining us in different time zones, please, again, do feel free to share it in your own time zone, in your own networks. We're only as effective as our partners being able to spread the word for us and be able to share the knowledge that we've garnered here. So thank you all for joining us here. And again, with that, I'll kick off with the sessions happening live on our conference platform and hope to see you over the week. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so much, Saqib. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabani.